Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Lots that is breaking this morning. We've got Kamala Harris out on a bit of a media tour, 60 Minutes. Call her daddy.
Many people are saying.
Yes, many people are saying. So we'll look at some of the clips that have come out of that. We also have Trump with a big rally returning to Butler, Pennsylvania, this time with Elon Musk. So that was quite interesting. Huge crowd there to see the former president. We also had some huge economic numbers that came out on Friday. Really big jobs report. We also have some other economic news in terms of the port strike being averted or being over. So we'll get into all of that and what that means for you and also for the political situation, what's going to happen in November. Today is October 7th, so it's 1 year anniversary from October 7th. We're going to take a look at, a year of war on Gaza and where things go from here as best we can tell. We're also, of course, still watching closely to see what Israel's response is to Iran. So really that whole region continues to be on edge in the face of Israeli provocations. And we've got Gabriel Sherman joining us here. He's got a new movie out. It's called The Apprentice, and it is sort of like Donald Trump's origin story. So it'll be very interesting to talk to him about that and because this is, at this point, Donald Trump has been in the public sphere for literally decades, my entire life, your entire life. It'll be interesting to ask Gabe, what is new that we'll get out of this movie?
I totally agree. Also, is the movie a political hit job? Is it actually interesting? What is the attempt? Gabe, just for people to know, he wrote one of my favorite books, which is a biography of Roger Ailes called The Loudest Voice in the Room. I highly recommend people watch it. I believe he also participated in that Showtime series where Russell Crowe played Roger Ailes. Highly worth watching that as well. So yes, look, I understand he's liberal coded, but he's a good writer, he's a good journalist, and I'm excited to talk.
The reviews I've read of it say it avoids that sort of just DR blue red dynamic and really tries to get into the psyche of what built this extraordinarily influential figure in American politics.
If you read Gabe Sherman's work, it's very clear where he's coming from, but he does a good job of actually humanizing and bringing these people to life, where if you are right wing, left wing, or whatever, you'll come away from it being oh, I kind of understand how this person ticks a little bit more. Yeah, listen, he's an old man and people are relatively set in their ways, and the origin story of that is actually quite fascinating. So yeah, a long way of saying excited to talk to him. Before we get to that, let's put this up there on the screen. We've got our discount going on right now for the election. You can go ahead and sign up. BP 2024 is the promo code for $15 off of our premium membership. We've got exclusive election content. We've only got 29 days left. Let's put that next one up there.
Crazy.
29 days until the election, only 4 weeks. So in the next 4 weeks, guys, we've got a lot of stuff that will be exclusive to our premium subscribers. Krystal and I's exclusive election predictions, our maps, etc. But more importantly, those partnerships that we have going on with our Race to the White House, Logan Phillips, who's got a great projection of his own model, and he's going to give us some exclusive insight. So you guys get the first access to that, breakingpoints.com, as well as all of our AMAs, which we'll actually be shooting later today. So there you go. You should sign up for that.
It's been such a weird election cycle.
That's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
The timing of it feels all wrong and weird, just given the Biden dropout and the condensed timeline and anyway.
No debates.
One debate.
Traditionally, we're supposed to have more debates. Right around now is when I think the second and the third would be there. We've also got a lot more early voting this time around. It's a crazy election. Yeah. It really is, and there's a lot to say about it. And with that, of course, considering the crazy election, this is also in some ways the podcast election. This is the election where you have both candidates who are very much making use of the new sphere of podcasts and their reach. First and foremost was Kamala Harris, who out of nowhere announced a media slew of appearances. First and foremost is Call Her Daddy with Alex Cooper, where the topic of abortion was predominant and really was the one that they spent the most time on. Let's take a listen to how that went for her.
Madam Vice President
Alex,
welcome to Call Her Daddy.
it is good to be with you.
I do want to clarify something. In the debate, former President Trump claimed that some states are executing babies after birth. Can you just clarify?
That is not happening anywhere in the United States. It is not happening, and it's a lie. It's a bold-faced lie that he is suggesting that, can you imagine? Can you imagine? He is suggesting that women in their 9th month of pregnancy are electing to have an abortion? Are you kidding? That is so outrageously inaccurate, and it's so insulting to suggest that that would be happening and that women would be doing that. It's not happening anywhere. This guy is full of lies. I mean, I just have to be very candid with you. When I was Attorney General, I was the top law enforcement officer of the biggest state in this country. And I was acutely aware that the words I spoke could be the difference between whether a corporation was in business or out of business, that the words I spoke could move markets. The idea that someone is not only so careless and irresponsible and reckless, but out and out lies to create fear and division in our country, and thinks he should be president of the United States standing behind the seal of the president of the United States using the microphone that comes with that?
So that was a decent enough taste of it. I listened to the full thing. It was basically all abortion all the time. Like, no offense to Alex, it's not really, I guess, her job to like sit there and challenge. It was relatively scripted.
Can you give people, because I actually have never listened to this podcast, even though this is very like, so it's one of the biggest podcasts in the world.
I think the second biggest podcast
It's like
in the world.
Rogan and then
yes,
her.
They call her daddy.
And I think the closest equivalent is to kind of say it is sort of like Rogan for women.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is the flagship pop culture show for women. So in the same way that there's like the Rogan universe and the Barstool universe, which is like sports, UFC, comedy, and all of that. To be fair to Alex Cooper, the niche that she created effectively is to have that, but for women. The show itself started off as like basically this raunchy sex show under Barstool. It's since transformed into, I would almost say like an Oprah for millennial and Gen Z women. A lot of the guests are reality television stars. It's a lot of like, a lot of it is like dating advice or like how to
self-help
find
kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not bad, I guess, per se. Clearly, people really enjoy it. She just struck a $125 million deal. I mean, I will say this. Look, as cringe as I found a lot of the content, it's obviously not for me. It's for younger Gen Z and millennial women, which is the hardest core demographic trending towards the Democratic Party in the last decade, and especially when you flip that on the side with men. So the way I would look at it is there is a reason that Trump is doing the Theo Von podcast. He'll be doing some other interesting podcasts, which you guys will see soon. The Aiden Ross show and others, which is trying to shore up that, while at the same time Kamala is now appearing on Call Her Daddy. They really are two sides of the same coin. And it is, it's not a bad strategy, especially if you want to go and you want to talk there about the issue of abortion. That's exactly something that I would do. What is interesting is that Alex did reverse her past position. She had actually been offered Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the past while Biden was still in the race. She said, I'm not interested in being political or any of that. But look, I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the girl who does Call Her Daddy is herself a liberal, especially as she's done previous stuff about Roe versus Wade. And I think one of the major cultural takeaways you can have from it is that the childless cat lady thing was a big flagship of that Call Her Daddy podcast, on top of the issue of abortion. That broke through in the same way like the Taylor Swift endorsement did as well. So it's not surprising, but it is definitely, it fits with the media strategy of both of these campaigns. When you're looking at young people, you want to go with the podcast demographic, and you specifically want to go to the demographics that are trending the most in your direction. Here, we're talking about young women, and we're talking about the issue of abortion.
And you're talking about young women who are not necessarily politically engaged.
Yeah.
So the thought is, okay, well, this is a platform, this is a show that has a wide reach among young women who may not be super plugged into the election, that I can speak to directly here on issues that I presume that they're going to be aligned on and interested in, et cetera. So, I mean, certainly as a political strategy, seems quite sound, quite reasonable. And it does, as you were saying, Saagar, like the choice of which podcast Trump is doing versus the choice of podcast that Kamala is doing also underscores like the underlying gender dynamics in this election, which some of the polls indicate you could have the largest gender gap possibly in history by the time voters go to the polls, and nowhere is that gender gap larger than among Gen Z. So, you know, when you're talking about, I mean, the podcast audience, it's not like podcasts are brand new. Older people have also discovered podcasts, so it's not like it's all Gen Z. But certainly, you're not reaching young people on traditional news shows this is your chance to reach out to a younger demographic?
I would put it as sure, older people will listen to podcasts, but a lot of them watch the news and consume the news. Whereas a lot of Gen Z people in particular, they're not turning the news on at all. At best, they may be served a clip from like us or anybody else who does independent media news shows. And even then, you're lucky if that's actually happening. IRL, it's like watching a viral clip go somewhere and or listening to your favorite Call Her Daddy episode on your drive to work or on a run or something
I could see this being the sort of thing that gets clipped into and shared on TikTok and all of that.
Yeah, well, she's huge. Alex Cooper is massive on TikTok, on Instagram as well. So look, it was a smart strategy. It's smart too whenever Trump does it, and he goes on these more like lifestyle men's podcasts as well. And I think you will see more of that during this election and not less. Now, also though, she did do some actual flagship, like traditional media, as flagship really as it gets, with 60 Minutes. This was as part of 60 Minutes major election series where they had interviews lined up with Trump and with Kamala. Trump actually ended up pulling out of 60 Minutes, but Kamala did sit for an interview with them. Perhaps most noteworthy was this answer on the U.S. relationship with Israel, some vintage Kamala word salad. Let's take a listen.
We supply Israel with billions of dollars in military aid. Mm-hmm. And yet Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to be charting his own course. The Biden-Harris administration has pressed him to agree to a ceasefire. He's resisted. You urged him not to go into Lebanon. He went in anyway. He has promised to make Iran pay for the missile attack, and that has the potential of expanding the war. Does the U.S. have no sway over Prime Minister Netanyahu?
The aid that we have given Israel allowed Israel to defend itself against 200 ballistic missiles that were just meant to attack the Israelis and the people of Israel. And when we think about the threat that Hamas, Hezbollah presents, Iran, I think that it is, without any question, our imperative to do what we can to allow Israel to defend itself against those kinds of attacks.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
Do we have a real close ally in Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I think, with all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes.
All right, so let me just repeat this about Israel. She says, well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
Okay. A lot of words there.
Gonna need a translator. What does that mean exactly? Well, look, we'll give 60 Minutes credit. The questions were actually quite good throughout the interview.
Much better than, hey, how quick do you want to nuke Iran?
Right,
which was the opening question in the debate.
Let's give them that.
So much better framing here.
In terms of the answer, well, it's a little bit difficult. And
yeah.
I think that highlights the very classic thing about the Kamala campaign. We're devoid of a lot of substance about what people are actually going to do. And look, this isn't just about a critic of us personally. It is clear through all the polling that we see right now amongst swing voters, the tiny slice of swing voters that are left in this country, they want to see more substance from Kamala. They actually are yearning to be like, hey, what are you going to do? Maybe not even if they care about the policy details, although I think some do. But there is this feeling that with Trump, I know everything. Not only was he in office, I feel like I know what he's going to do. There's a familiarity there. With Kamala, the question mark is still big enough that answers like this, I really don't think they behoove her to swing voters.
They definitely do not behoove her to anyone. I mean, listen, let's talk about the politics first. So poll after poll shows not only do people want more substance, they want separation from Joe Biden.
Yes.
The messages that test the best for Kamala Harris and have since she got into the race is where she establishes her own ideas and her separation from this continually unpopular president. So here you have an issue where his policy is failed, where he is very unpopular, where not just the base of the party, but the majority of the American public would like to see a different direction in terms of actually using U.S. leverage to, I don't know, withhold weapon shipments so that we don't continue to see, complete annihilation throughout the entire Middle East, which is the track that we're on right now, vis-a-vis Israel and Iran and Lebanon and Gaza and the West Bank, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here you have perfect opportunity to establish a little bit of distance, and instead you get whatever the hell that was. And the truth of the matter is, if you're there just to defend the Biden policy, you can't. You can't. Because the Biden policy has been one of impotence and failure. At this point, there was once a time where they could have said, okay, well, and not that this was really accurate, but at least it was something they could say, oh, we've avoided a wider war. You can't say that anymore. So you've allowed total annihilation of the Gaza Strip, and now we stand on the precipice of some massive escalation with regards to Iran. So you can't answer that question and say, oh, here's how our policy has worked. Here's how we've used leverage. Here's how we've constrained Israeli behavior, because there's literally nothing you could point to at this point. So, just to give people a sense on the substance here as well, there's all these articles being written now that are total cope and cover for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that are like, oh, well, he tried, but he just doesn't really have power in the region. Total and complete bullshit. The Surf shared this list of U.S. presidents, all Republicans, by the way, who effectively used leverage to constrain Israeli behavior. Can go back to Dwight Eisenhower during the Suez Crisis of the 50s, leveraged the threat of sanctions to convince Israel to withdraw from the Sinai Peninsula. Also temporarily delayed funding to Israel over its construction of a hydroelectric project on the Jordan River. Ronald Reagan, back in 1981, indefinitely delayed 2 shipments of F-16 fighter jets to Israel over escalating levels of violence in the Middle East. The following year, warned Congress Israel might have violated its arms agreement with the U.S. by using American-made weapons during its invasion of Lebanon. In 1983, reaffirmed he would not send those F-16 jets until Israel withdrew from Lebanon. Quote, while these forces are in the position of occupying another country that now has asked them to leave, we are forbidden by law to release those planes. George H.W. Bush, in 1992, the Bush administration threatened to withhold the delivery of $10 billion in loan guarantees to Israel if it continued building settlements in the occupied West Bank and Gaza, according to the Washington Post. So somehow, previous presidents have managed to figure this out and not just get rolled over and over and over and over again, not just allow the country to be humiliated and civilians to be endlessly slaughtered throughout the entire region, but this hapless, failed president, with a policy that Kamala Harris is here defending, couldn't seem to do anything more than temporarily delay one shipment of weapons that then, of course, was superseded by many, many, many more shipments of weapons so Israel could continue to do whatever the hell they want. Yes. And Bibi Netanyahu knows all of this, which is why he has known from the beginning that any of these quote-unquote red lines were utterly meaningless because Biden and Harris were unwilling to use the leverage that is available to the U.S. in order to constrain their behavior.
Yeah, we will, I'm sure, this is part of the other problem without debates is that, this is about as good as we're probably going to get before Election Day of a genuinely substantive answer from Kamala, especially considering the rest of the interviews that we have lined up. Let's put this up there on the screen. So Monday, we had the 60 Minutes interview that's going to air in full. Tuesday, Harris will speak to The View, The Howard Stern Show, and The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. I'm sure we'll get a lot of hard-hitting stuff out of those. And then we have Harris campaigning in Nevada. She will participate in a Univision town hall. Finally, on Friday, she will campaign in Arizona. The reason why I think this schedule is very important, especially if you pair it with the Call Her Daddy appearance that aired yesterday, is let's look at the full view of the demographics in each one. For Call Her Daddy, it's young women. For The View, Howard Stern, and for The Late Show, we're talking about white boomers specifically. Then Univision, we're looking at Latinos, and then obviously Harris campaigning in the battleground state of Arizona. So what we see is their, electoral path of which they need to shore people up. They need to drive up the vote as much as possible there with young women, with white boomers. They need to try and win those college-educated voters at an even higher pace than they did last time around. More suburban folks, the people who are older, anybody who still tunes into The View, Howard Stern, or The Late Show. And then the Univision Town Hall, that is going to be direct directly targeted at Latino voters, of whom she's lost the most ground with, compared to past Democrats, where Trump is likely to win, not a majority per se, but maybe a majority of men, and very likely as close to 50-50 as a Republican will have gotten since George W. Bush back in the 2000s. So I think those appearances, when we take them all together, even 60 Minutes, honestly, it's one of those, probably still the most watched news program in the entire country. You put that together, you really see a clear picture of like the demographics. They are going hard for them. They are trying to drive out turnout amongst the people who they see either as needing to shore up or the traditional constituencies of the Democratic Party.
I think you can also read into this that they have somewhat decided to switch strategies from the just like hiding her and, you know, hoping that the paid communications are sufficient. They appear to have heard the criticism that, like, listen, this thing is on a knife's edge, and if you want to win, you got to be out there doing more than playing prevent defense. So that's also part of what's noteworthy about this, you know, relatively more aggressive schedule of media appearances. And yeah, the Call Her Daddy is more of a niche audience. It's a large audience, but it's also like targeting a specific demographic. Univision also obviously targeting a specific demographic. The other ones, these are broad, general population, like very mainstream. The View, The Howard Stern Show, Late Show with Stephen Colbert, more of a broad swath of the American public, and certainly an older demographic than Call Her Daddy, for example.
There you go. Makes a lot of sense. And it really, again, it just really tells me like what they're looking for and try to do. On top of that switch strategy, like you said, Tim Walz has now announced a slew of media appearances. Similarly, he appeared on Fox News Sunday in a challenging back and forth on the issue of abortion. Honestly, smart, because really it showed that he was nervous in that debate, and he was rusty a little bit, I think, in terms of answering questions. This time around, it definitely changed up a bit. He was challenged on abortion and on past misstatements. Let's go ahead and listen to the abortion section first.
Abortion is legal throughout pregnancy in Minnesota. There is no ban or limit on abortion in Minnesota based on how far along in a pregnancy you are. You signed the bill that makes it legal through all 9 months. Is that a position you think Democrats should advocate for nationally?
Look, the vice president and I have been clear. The restoration of Roe versus Wade is what we're asking for.
But that
this is
law
a
goes
woman's
far beyond
right
Roe v. Wade
to make her own choice. The law is very clear. It does not change that. That was been debunked on every occasion.
But wait, let's agree. What you signed is there's not a single limit through 9 months of pregnancy. Roe had a trimester framework that did have limits through the pregnancy. The Minnesota law does not have that.
This puts the decision with the woman and her health care providers. The situation we have is when you don't have the ability of health care providers to provide that, that's where you end up with a situation like Amanda Zaworski in Texas, where they are afraid to do what's necessary. This doesn't change anything. It puts the decision back on to the woman, to the physicians, and we know that this is simply something to be brought up to be very clear. Donald Trump's asking for a nationwide abortion ban.
Wait, he
and
has
again,
said that
we don't see this as a winning campaign.
repeatedly that he will not sign a national abortion ban. Are you calling that just, it's a flat-out lie?
Yes, of course, and Senator Vance has in the past said so too. Now look, they may see this as an election issue. We see it as a right of women to make their own bodily decisions.
So, look, clearly that was that is good ground for Tim Walz and the Kamala Harris campaign, and it was an intentional choice that his first cable news interview was going to go to Fox News Sunday. He also got asked about those past misstatements. Let's see how it went for him, especially very shaky area in the debate. It went a little bit better for him this time.
Listen, before we go, because I wish that we had a full hour, I want to give you a chance, because you called yourself a knucklehead this week, to talk about some of your misstatements. Yes. You've modified your story or explained that you misspoke about things involving your military rank, about carrying a weapon in war, your 1995 DUI arrest, using IVF to have your beautiful children, Gus and Hope, being in Hong Kong and China in the summer of 1989 during the Tiananmen events. A lot of people would say they couldn't get away with saying, I'm just too passionate, my grammar's not right, I'm a knucklehead. What do you say to the American people who think, I don't know that I can trust this guy with all those modifications to be the potential commander-in-chief of this country?
Yeah, well, I think they heard me. They heard me the other night speaking passionately about gun violence and misspeaking. And I got to be honest with you, Shannon, I don't think people care whether I used IUI or IVF when we talk about this. What they understand is Donald Trump would resist those things. Look, I speak passionately. I had an entire career, decades before I was in public office. They know, and I'm very proud of my 24 years in service and my record. I have never disparaged someone else in this, but I know that's not what Donald Trump does.
So look, I mean, I don't know what it is. Walz is a lot more
This is
comfortable
like a different guy.
in cable news as opposed to the China misspoke. I don't know what's going on there, but look, this is why it's just funny. That's why he got the VP pick in the first place.
Right.
It's going viral on TV. And then it took a bad debate performance for him to then go back on TV. But look, I mean, I guess you could see two different ways. One is they see it clearly as an error that they weren't doing more media and they were trying the safe strategy. They also could be intentional, as in they held it back as far as they could, risk-wise, and then in the sprint to Election Day, only 29 days left, you're going to try and pepper in as more media appearances. Traditionally, this is when the most amount of eyeballs will be on these people, and with the swing voters in a very, very narrow election, really only data-wise 3 weeks before is when they really start to pay attention. This is crazy. I mean, to me, probably to you, and most of the people who watch this show, there are millions of people, specifically swing voters, who don't make up their mind until like 2 weeks before Election Day. Some of them don't even make up their mind until like the day of the Election Day. And the things they look for and they consider their votes on are not the way that you and I would be doing it. And a lot of it will be dependent on media. It will be dependent on the vibe of the candidate, sometimes the vibe of the day itself. There's a lot of political science research on this, so it's kind of fascinating. In the era where there are less swing voters than ever, but they are still so determinative and matter, this period will be the most important, and that's when media, I think, is going to matter the most.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible also that they were just like super focused on debate prep. But
Yeah, I
in
guess.
my
It just
opinion, this
failed.
is better debate prep than apparently whatever Pete Buttigieg was throwing
Of
at him
course,
in
yeah.
in a cloistered room. So it is funny. I mean, I understand that the debate skill set and just the sense of pressure at this one moment, you've got this one opportunity, this one debate, and you've got someone who's adversarial, you don't know what they're going to throw at you, et cetera, et cetera. I understand it being somewhat different, but it's kind of wild how much better he is in these cable news interviews where he's so comfortable, he's so forceful, he's able to like turn it, difficult questions into a strength, et cetera. I knew he must have done well even before I watched it because the only things that the like Trump War Rooms accounts were sharing was like the tough questions she was asking, not even his responses. So, this is really a big part of why he ends up on the ticket because he brings this level of comfort and, this level of aggressive and effective communication skills to the tickets. So, hopefully they'll be putting him out there more because I do think in these settings, he really is an asset and proves that, he's not a great debater, but when it comes to communicating in these forums, he's certainly ready for prime time.
It's just in general, it's always just better to go on, especially in an adversarial interview.
Yeah.
Like that one was pretty fair. And so, it works for him. Obviously, it worked well for J.D. Vance, too, because that was a lot of the way that his team prepared for those debates, was just throw him into every single Jake Tapper interview or Meet the Press or Margaret Brennan on CBS. And that's part of why he felt very comfortable there from the very beginning. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.